A woman sits alone on a rock. She has no army, no title, no name that history cared to remember. She has been sitting there for 5 months, day after day, night after night. She is not praying out loud. She is not giving speeches. She is simply watching. And somehow, that silence is about to force a king to change everything. This is the story of Rizpah. The story comes from the second book of Samuel, chapter 21, and to understand what happened, you need 3 pieces of background. First, Israel is starving. A famine has lasted 3 years. 3 years of failed harvests. 3 years of people going without. King David consults God to find out why. The answer surprises him. The famine is a consequence of something the previous king did. Not David. King Saul, years earlier, had tried to destroy the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites were a people living inside Israel's borders, protected by a sacred promise made centuries before, in the time of Joshua. Saul broke that promise, and according to the text, the land was now carrying the weight of it. Second, you need to know who Rizpah is. She was a concubine of King Saul. That title matters. A concubine in the ancient world was not a wife. She had no legal standing of her own. She could not refuse royal decisions. She had 2 sons with Saul, Armoni and Mephibosheth, not the famous Mephibosheth of Jonathan's line you may have heard of, a different man with the same name, 2 grown sons. Her children. Third, you need to understand what David decided to do. To settle the blood debt with the Gibeonites, he identified 7 male descendants of Saul and handed them over. The Gibeonites executed them. Then they did something that, under Israel's own law in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, was a serious violation. They left the bodies exposed on a hill, unburied, open to the sky, not for 1 night, for months. Birds circled above. Animals came at night. The text does not cut to a priest performing a ceremony. It does not cut to a royal response. It cuts to one woman. Rizpah walks to that hill. She spreads her sackcloth on a rock, and she sits down. She is not leaving. To understand why this moment mattered, you need to see it through the eyes of the ancient world. Gibeon was a real city. Archaeologists identify it with a site called El Gib, north of Jerusalem. In the 1950s and 60s, American archaeologist James Pritchard excavated the area. His team found something remarkable: jar handles stamped with the Hebrew letters for Gibeon, 56 of them. That discovery confirmed the city's identity and connected the biblical text to a real physical place. Pritchard's team also uncovered the Great Pool of Gibeon, a massive circular cistern cut directly into the rock. This pool is mentioned elsewhere in 2 Samuel, and finding it exactly where the text described made headlines in biblical archaeology. Gibeon was not a legend. It was a city in a real political landscape, and that landscape was brutal. David's kingdom was still fragile. Saul's family had supporters across the northern tribes. Surviving male descendants of Saul were potential threats to David's throne. Executing 7 of them, using a religious justification, removed those threats in a single move. The ancient world understood this kind of politics well. Sacred debts and covenant obligations were regularly used to accomplish things that were also politically convenient. Leaving executed bodies exposed was also a documented practice across the ancient Near East. Egyptian stone carvings from roughly this period show defeated enemies displayed at city gates. Legal codes from Mesopotamia treated body exposure as a form of final dishonor. It was not just death, it was an announcement. Your name ends here. Your family ends here. You are erased. Rizpah understood exactly what that meant, and she refused to accept it. This is where the questions begin. The text says that when David heard what Rizpah had done, he went and gathered the bones of Saul and Jonathan from another city. He collected the bones of the 7 executed men as well. He gave all of them a proper burial. And then the text says something striking. God heeded the prayers for the land. The famine ended. After 3 years, right after Rizpah's vigil and the burial she inspired. What exactly happened here? Some scholars read this as a straightforward account of divine justice. Saul broke a covenant. People suffered. A blood debt was paid. A faithful woman honored the dead. A king found his conscience. God restored the land. In this reading, everything fits inside the framework of sacred law and divine mercy. Rizpah's vigil completed what the execution alone could not, but others read it very differently. Historians who study ancient Near Eastern politics point out something uncomfortable. David gained a great deal from this. 7 male descendants of Saul eliminated in one event with religious justification. No blood on David's hands. No civil war to explain. The narrative follows a pattern found across the ancient world. Use a legitimate grievance to solve a personal problem. Some researchers also note that the text never records a direct prophetic confirmation. David consulted God. He received an answer, but the text does not show us anything that verified that answer independently. There is a third interpretation, and it may be the most powerful of all. A number of biblical scholars, particularly those who study the overlooked voices in Scripture, argue that the real force driving this story is not David's politics or even divine justice. It is Rizpah's body, her presence. A woman with no legal standing, sitting on a rock, refusing to let history erase her sons without a witness. She does not appeal to the law. She does not petition the king. She simply becomes impossible to ignore. These 3 readings do not cancel each other out. They exist together inside the same text, pulling in different directions, the way the most honest stories always do. What Rizpah did has a name in modern psychology. It is called continuing bonds. For a long time, grief counselors believed that healthy grief meant moving on, letting go, closing the chapter, but research in the 90s began to challenge that. The theory of continuing bonds recognizes that maintaining a connection to those we have lost is not a sign of illness. It can be a form of love that refuses to accept erasure. Rizpah's sons were not just dead. They were being turned into symbols of a political settlement. Their bodies were displayed to make a statement about power, and Rizpah refused to let that statement be the final word. She was not fighting the execution itself. She was fighting the dehumanization that came after it. Psychologists also use a term called disenfranchised grief. This describes grief that society refuses to acknowledge. A concubine mourning sons she had no legal power to protect. A woman with no title asking the world to see what it had done. Her vigil made that grief visible, public, and impossible to dismiss. And then there is the psychology of silent witness. Research shows that sustained wordless presence creates a different kind of pressure than argument or confrontation. When someone refuses to look away from what has been done, those watching are forced to construct the meaning themselves. They cannot argue against a position because no position was stated. There is only a person sitting on a rock through heat and rain and darkness for 5 months. David heard about it, and he moved. This pattern appears across human history in contexts far removed from Scripture. The power of persistent, silent witness is one of the most documented forces in how moral change actually happens. Rizpah discovered it 3,000 years before anyone gave it a name. We cannot know with certainty whether what David did was divine justice or political strategy. We cannot know whether the famine ended because of a covenant restored or because of a mother who refused to walk away. The text holds both possibilities at once, and maybe that is exactly the point. What we do know is what Rizpah actually did. She had no power. She was not given justice. She was not promised a resolution. She decided that someone had to stay, that her sons deserved a witness, and that decision reached a king, moved his conscience, and changed the story. Not all power looks like power, and not every voice sounds like a voice. If stories like this, one move you, stories where faith and history and the deep places of human experience all meet, this channel is where you belong. Every episode, we go deeper into the people and mysteries that Scripture does not always explain. If this video made you think, please leave a like. It costs you nothing and it helps more people find these stories. And if you want to keep searching, subscribe. We will be here, looking closer.